Hello, and welcome back to the Diverse Thinking, Different Learning podcast. I've spoken to hundreds of parents over the years, and many really struggle with how to help their children understand their learning and developmental differences. And that's why I wanted to interview today's guest, Dr. Liz Angoff. She's a licensed educational psychologist with a diploma in school neuropsychology, and she provides assessment and consultation services to children and their families in the Bay Area, California. And she's here today to discuss how to explain a diagnosis or a learning difference to children and adolescents.
Millions of kids struggle with learning, processing, and social emotional difficulties. These challenges interfere with their ability to reach their full potential. Dr. Karen Wilson is here to help. Her extensive background in pediatric neuropsychology and higher education have prepared her for this unique mission. Listen as she delivers content to inform, educate, and empower parents and educators. This will enable you to identify challenges that kids face and get them on the road to achieving their full potential. This is Diverse Thinking, Different Learning by Child Nexus.
Dr. Angoff, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. I'm really excited to be here. This is great.
I am excited as well. I was saying to you before that I was in the virtual room when you gave a powerful presentation about communicating to kids about their learning and their cognitive profiles. And I just found myself nodding and taking copious notes. I'm a huge fan of your work and what you're doing, and so grateful to have you here because it's just a conversation that many parents are afraid to have with their kids. And I'm trying to understand, I understand why that is, but really wanted to demystify the process and to really help parents better understand language that they should use, when to explain to kids that they think and learn differently, how to do that. And it just seems that when kids get to our offices for an assessment, they already have a sense that something's up, that they've been struggling, that they're different in some way. So it's not a secret. I just spoke with another practitioner who said that parents came into her office and whispered, he has ADHD, but he doesn't know. And, but he knows.
But he knows. Yep. He might not know the term ADHD, but he knows something's different, right? I mean, you're touching on probably the most important foundational concept that drives this work, which is realizing that kids know. But they, and we know this intuitively from our practice and from working with kids, but it's actually starting to come out in the research as we start to hear voices from more late diagnosed adults and hear their stories of how they understood themselves before they got their diagnosis. And it turns out that kids do develop a narrative. They don't hang out waiting for us to explain to them why they feel different. And the narratives they develop are so often negative and harmful. And then they carry those with them. And so a lot of this work, even if I think a lot of parents are afraid to have these conversations because they worry it's going to hurt a child's self-esteem. Well, all too often, kids already have these negative narratives that they are keeping secret and trying so hard to prove otherwise. And so their self-esteem is getting chipped away at the longer we wait to name what's going on and have real conversations with them. And when we do start to name things, what we're doing is we're working with kids to shift that narrative from the I can't, I'm lazy, I must be stupid, I'm not as smart as I think I am, some version of I'm broken, to maybe I'm built differently. And the reality is being built differently is hard. We can't get away from that. And so many kids feel relieved to be validated in that way. And then we also can help them understand how being different is pretty amazing and actually is connected. The way that their brain is wired is connected also to the strengths that they bring to the table, to all of the things that are amazing and awesome about this child. It's all part of one package. And when we can be really transparent and realistic with kids, we're shifting that narrative to something that is validating and more helpful as they move forward.
Absolutely. And I think that shifting that narrative is really key, because I have also evaluated adults, a lot of women who are getting diagnosed with ADHD in adulthood, who will tell the story that I always knew that something was different about me, and I had to push back against that. There's a lot of masking and hiding the difficulties, not really understanding and believing, like you're saying, I'm lazy, I'm not working hard enough, I should be able to do this, and not having an explanation as to why this is so hard. And then not recognizing their strengths. And I do believe it's important to share with children and adolescents information about their unique brains, which I love that you do. And like you were saying, at the same time, you don't want to confirm for kids that something is broken inside them. So how do you strike that balance between educating them about how amazing their brains are, that everybody's brain is different, but also there are some areas that you are struggling with that maybe other kids aren't struggling with. And there are things that we can do to support and help you.
Yeah. I can't emphasize enough that like 99% of the kids that I work with, it is a relief to hear that, okay, there is something different and something that's harder for me, and it's okay. And I'm not alone. Right. So and this idea that we go in saying like, you're amazing. We found all of these strengths, and we end there. Or the superpowers of dyslexia. I have one, I think she was 12 or 13 at the time, that I was like, let's talk about your dyslexic superpowers. And she's like, I am so expletive sick and tired of hearing about my superpowers. It is hard to be dyslexic. I'm like, okay, let's talk about why it's hard. And she goes, thank you. So it was a really pivotal moment for me to realize that validating these things is actually really empowering to kids. And so striking what the balance means is that, look, there's two sides to this. And I actually use a metaphor that I start with kids before we get into what the diagnosis is, to just say like, listen, we've learned a lot of things about your brain. And of course, I work with kids within the assessment process. So throughout the assessment process, we really use these different activities that we do to identify where things come easily for kids and where things may be more tricky. And then we get super curious about why that's tricky. And the metaphor that I use is a brain under construction. So we think about all of our brains are under construction, whether you have a diagnosable difference or you are just part of the amazing network of, neurodiversity that we have in our world. There are differences in the ways that our brains are built, and all of our brains are under construction. So we can talk about the way that your brain is making connections, like little roads in your brain. Some of those roads are highways, things that come easily. And these may be natural talents that you have, things that have always come easily, or they may be things that you built, things that you worked really hard at that now come easily. And so we can recognize both of those things. Here are some things that are just natural skills, and let's name them, because language is so powerful. That internal narrative that's telling them that they're lazy and broken and, and dumb and is really powerful. And the language naming like, oh, there are things that come easily to me is so powerful. And then we can talk about the things that they have built already. And so for little kids, sometimes we kind of, it's fun to talk about like learning how to walk, because they see toddlers and who are, kind of toddling all over the place. And they say, oh, I guess my brain really had to learn that. But what we're doing is we're showing kids, yeah, your brain has been under construction and it's completed construction before. You can do this. You have built things. You didn't know how to ride a bike, and now you do. You didn't know how to read, and now you do. You didn't know how to write your name, and now you do. So there are things that you have built that you can remember doing that work. And then we have our next construction project. And so let's talk about the things that are coming next. And talking about the things that are hard as the next construction project keeps it in motion. It's not saying this is a roadblock. This is, you have your strength, you have things that you can't do, but look, you have a consolation prize of the things that are easy. that's not how it works, right? Like you are constantly under construction. There are things that come more easily. Some construction projects are, they move along at a good pace and that's really rewarding. Some are frustrating. Materials don't come in on time, like a worker quits. There's all kinds of things that get in the way, and we can really have fun thinking about all the different ways that we build these skills. And that helps us think about the things that are harder for you, that are under construction for you, and about the tools that we're going to use to build that piece.
Right. And it seems that analogy, using the under construction analogy, really helps kids and teens understand that there are so many different missing parts or different parts that are working together. And it normalizes the experience of having things that you do really well and things that you are working on. Because, as you think about kids progressing in school, they're always learning something new. They're always developing new skills. So it kind of normalizes that process, but at the same time helps them to realize that even as they're learning new things, that learning this thing might be harder for you than it is for Jack. But then again, something that you do really well might be harder for Jack. And so it normalizes the experience of things being hard and also things coming easily for kids.
Yeah. And I know that one of the things that is kind of important about thinking about talking to kids is that this is an ongoing conversation. There's no one moment. Even as a practitioner, I have one feedback session with a child. And so I think when I started this work, I thought, okay, this is my chance. And actually in talking to parents, a lot of parents have said, like, I feel like I have one chance and I'm going to mess it up. And there's no messing this up, because it's, they're just getting the conversation started is so important. And it's never going to be one moment, because that's not how learning works. There's nothing that you learn in one moment. So we're setting things up to be ongoing. And that's why I think the metaphor is really helpful, because you can integrate it into daily conversation. And like, oh, wow, you built a new road today. Or like, wow, I'm just noticing that like you've really had this construction project and I feel like you've made some progress. I was just thinking about like how, I recognize that we're not there yet, and that can be frustrating, but I was just thinking about where we were 3 months ago. Or what you just brought up, and this becomes really relevant with siblings, that isn't it interesting that your sibling has this highway and this construction zone, and you have that construction zone as your highway, and your sibling has this, and then you have this construction zone. And so we can talk about differences in a way that's really validating that we're all under construction. And then as an adult, and I use this with my child all the time, like, wow, you know what? This is something that I'm working on as a parent, because the parent roads are new in my brain and I have to learn them. So this is an example of me working on my own construction projects.
Absolutely. And I love the language that you use, because I really think that using, again, and you talk about this empowering, positive, validating language is so important. When you say, isn't it interesting? Right. I can see the cortisol levels just decreasing, because it's not a judgment. It's not that this is bad. This is interesting, that this is different, or this is harder for you. And I think that when kids understand that they are still building, and that's part of the language that you use, they also understand and maybe even be more accepting of the tools and support that we provide them. Because who's going to build a road if you don't have any tools?
Yeah. Exactly. I think that, isn't it interesting? It's so funny. It's interesting to me that that's so much part of the vocabulary now, but I think that it comes from a place of really having a goal of inspiring curiosity in kids. When we're thinking about their brains, when we're looking at a diagnosis, I really feel that assessment should be approached from a place of just intense curiosity of what's going on. How do we talk about it? How do we think about it? I mean, we have these diagnostic categories, which I'm sure we'll get into, kind of how you explain different diagnoses, but they are boxes, and they don't help us understand the entirety of human experience and of your child's experience. And everybody who is named with a certain box has a different experience in the world. So getting really curious about the nuances and getting kids into that place of curiosity as well about, and so I ask kids a lot, like, how would you explain this? This is what I think I'm seeing. do you agree? Would you say it differently? What do you think is going on? And just asking those questions and really respecting their input and the way that they describe things, or even holding space for the fact that they don't know how to describe it yet. But like, ooh, I'm really, just planting those seeds of let's think about it. It not only helps us understand the child and gets into like really helping them stay in that place of curiosity when things are hard. But I think it's really actually building those executive functioning skills that we need to have that meta process of understanding like how we're going to approach this problem, staying emotionally regulated when we hit those construction zones, and really being able to persevere when you can take that stance of curiosity.
Yes, I completely agree. And, you mentioned explaining diagnoses to kids. And that comes up a lot for parents, because even practitioners I talk to who offer a child feedback, and that's something that we do as well, less than half, want you to have that feedback session with their kids because they're afraid, and there's fear about, well, if my child knows, then is that going to make them try less or give them an excuse for why they're struggling? Is it going to label them as something else I hear? How important is it to name dyslexia, ADHD, autism when you're talking to children and adolescents?
Yeah. So I just first want to validate those concerns. Because while the neurodiversity movement is really gaining steam, and as practitioners, we're starting to think about these things differently, we don't have a universal shift. So I think that the concerns about how will my child be perceived, what does this label mean for them, I think it's really important to think about those things and have those conversations about the worries and what that means. At the same time, when we name what's going on, we are giving kids a container for all of these feelings and experiences, and just kind of maybe the better metaphor is like a hub to connect things back to. And things are going to change over time. And so when we know that like, oh, this is what ADHD looks like as an adolescent, or this is how it's showing up for me now, when you have a place to tie things back to, it grounds you. It doesn't feel like, oh, I'm spinning out with something else or something else wrong with me now. Like, okay, this is what this looks like now. And it's grounding. Another thing that naming it does is it gives you community. And it lets you know that you are not the only person to experience these things. You get to look into other people and models and connect with people who have walked these roads before, or maybe built these roads before, and see how they've done that. You get to see models of creating a different road, because sometimes, especially with our neurodivergent youth, it's actually not about building a skill. It's about getting comfortable and finding that different road that's yours, and knowing, you know what, the main road that most people take is actually not my road. I have a different road. And so having models of that is so important to the self-esteem, to recognizing that there's no excuses here. This is not something that's going to get in the way. This is not a roadblock. It's not going to get in the way of my success or becoming my person, but I may have to do things differently. And so having those models, especially when you feel frustrated, and things are hard, is so important for kids and their mental health.
Yes. And I'm just really pulled in by, I may have to do things differently. That alone, that statement is just empowering for kids, because then it gives them permission to not have to go down the same road as others, and also validation and affirmation that that's okay, and that I will get to the end, but I'm going to be on a different road than you are.
Yeah, I think that is really, really important. In that language, when we develop that language with kids, and I think of assessment, and the same is true of in therapeutic contexts of really creating a shared language with kids. So I give them this metaphor. I give them some brain language so that they have something, because they don't come in with this language. They come in with their other narrative, right? And so we're giving them some language, but then I'm really listening to how they describe things. And so often, once they have some words to put to their experience, it really helps parents get the confidence of, okay, this is going to be okay. Because what we're going to do is we're going to define the diagnosis with the child's words. And a diagnosis is not telling them like, oh, by the way, you didn't know this, but this is a thing that's wrong with you. And I think that's the thing that parents are worried about, that we're going to be giving them something that tells them something they didn't know somehow, or will make them feel bad, or like, oh, there's this thing called ADHD. Now I don't have to do anything. Kids do well if they can. They want to do well. And so when we define things by their words and their experiences, we're just naming and containing that that experience so that they have a way to think about it differently. And a lot of times, sharing with parents how kids are thinking about their experience is what they need to feel more confident about having these conversations, because those words make sense. So let me just give you an example. I have a child that the family was very wary of an ADHD diagnosis, but in the course of assessment, that the child was talking about how she is equally frustrated by morning routine and homework time as her parents are. And she's like, I know that my dad is so annoyed by me asking all these questions, but like, I don't know what else to do. And so as we were talking about things, she's like, I love talking. You know, I get told in class all the time that I'm talking too much, and I'm supposed to write down my questions. I was like, I'm wondering, this theme keeps coming up. Like, do you learn by talking to other people? And she's like, I think so. I think I do. I said, does that make you think differently about homework time? She's like, am I asking my dad questions because I want to talk to somebody? I wonder if that's true. And so we go back to dad and we say, like, we have a different theory about what's going on. And it just changes the dynamic dramatically. And we can think about how active his child is and how interactive his child is and how she's using her strengths that, like need to talk through things and to get up and to have a way to break up the homework time and to reframe what's going on, starting with her words as this is a way she's working with her brain. Now it becomes a lot more clear why we have to name that, because we're validating the child's experience and it's making a difference in the dynamic in the house, because now we have a way of talking about this different kind of brain, this different kind of processing that didn't make sense before.
Absolutely. And that really feeds into what you were saying before about changing the narrative, because, I also see kids who have ADHD who come in and say, kids are always telling me that I'm annoying, or I'm always getting in trouble for not putting up my hand. And I don't mean to, it just comes out, and they don't understand why they're getting in trouble. They don't understand why it's harder for them to raise their hand and then speak, because they're naturally, they want to speak first and then the hand goes up, right? And then it's too late. They're already in trouble. And then there's the kids who have the inattentive presentation who say, I'm always worried that I'm missing something because, I'm daydreaming, I'm thinking about other things, and it's really bothering me that I can't focus. I want to focus, and people think that I don't want to focus when I actually really do, but it's just really hard.
Yeah. So I think, like, you asked about the balance before, and framing these things as, okay, so you have a that inattentive, just take the inattentive presentation that, what we learned is you have this really like curious and creative mind. And I can see that in the testing, because remember when, we did the storytelling task and you like lit up and that was really exciting? Or do you remember when we did I had you write sentences, and most kids would write like, the cat is blue. and, like these short sentences. And you wrote me an entire story, and it just like got really lost in your ideas. Like, these are such strengths, such highways for you. And sometimes when you're in the classroom and you're supposed to be thinking about one thing, that creative mind is going to take over. And that's what distraction is. It's this highway that's kind of taking you off course sometimes. And so we're going to build another road. And that's going to be the in-class road when you have to focus on one thing. And so that we're not throwing away all your creativity. And when it happens, it's not because you're, not paying attention, or you don't want to, or you're lazy, or you don't care. It's none of those things. It's just your brain goes on default creativity. So we're going to have to work a little harder to figure out skills and strategies to keep you in the classroom, in that, like, to keep your brain in the place that you want it to be and give you more intentionality. And then suddenly we have, kids who are really excited to learn how to take notes because now they know why that's really going to help them. Or suddenly, have kids who are really excited to sit in the front row because they realize, like, that's how I'm going to keep my brain there, because it's just for the classroom that I have to do this. And then my creative, divergent thinking brain is actually really useful for other things. So I can hold that balance.
Right. And I just feel like the way that you explained it, that's where the relief comes in for kids, because they understand and they connect it to their experience. And then it's like, aha, that's why. And that's what I need to do. And that's okay. All of those things at the same time.
There's actually some research that shows that when we take this therapeutic approach to assessment, the interventions are actually more effective. For adults, at least, where the research was done that adults who have this kind of understanding, you've been through this kind of process of really understanding their brains, they're more likely to stay in the intervention. It's more likely to be effective. One of the great psychologists in our area, Dr. Cecil Reynolds, had, when, I had the opportunity to talk to him about some of this kind of thing, his reaction was, this is going to make intervention more effective for kids. Because when they know why they are getting this intervention, when they are invested, when it's answering a problem that they have, that they recognize that they have, then it's going to make a world of difference, because they know why they're there and they want to see the progress as much as we do.
Right. And I think about the kid who's moved to the front of the row, how that can be a very empowering experience. But for kids who don't know why they're being moved, it's like, you just moved me from my friend. I was sitting beside my friend.
Exactly.
Now I'm in the front of the class. Is this punishment for not paying attention? And so they have a different narrative, because that intervention, that accommodation has not been explained to them in a way that makes sense.
Yeah. Isn't that amazing? Just that simple shift.
Yes.
And the experience is entirely different for that child.
Right. Absolutely. And the other thing that you said is that when you share a child's diagnosis and they can get a sense of community, they can connect with others who've kind of walked that road before, is what you said. It helps kids to not feel as alone in that experience, that there are others like me who have, not the same brain, but a similar way of seeing the world, of interacting with the world, of learning, of thinking. And it makes them feel like they're not the only one who is walking this road and experiencing these struggles in a particular way.
Yeah, I have a child recently who, I diagnosed her with dyslexia, and the child is super resistant. It's just like, in a lot of adolescents, or, especially like middle school, late elementary, middle school, we get a lot of kids who like, there's nothing wrong with me, like, I won't even go there, even with all of this work. But we were able to make some small changes by, she talked about how she learns best in science. We talked about how her brain works best when there's explosions. So she loves the science because it's interactive and, hands-on and all of this. And so we were able to get some language around how only talking classes are hard, but the explosion classes are easier. But when we talked about dyslexia, I did talk to her about it. We did name it. She was kind of silent, but she has a little cupcake business, and I showed her some examples of entrepreneurs who are dyslexic. And I said, there's actually a lot of entrepreneurs who are dyslexic because having a brain that works differently gives you ideas nobody ever thought of before. And so you're being an entrepreneur. I don't think it's an accident of your brain. I think it's a very natural consequence of having this different kind of brain. And again, stoic during the session. She's like, barely said goodbye. But later that day, she's hanging out with her grandpa and says randomly, "Grandpa, did you know a lot of entrepreneurs are dyslexic?" So we know we've moved the needle. We know we've started to shift that narrative, that now she's like just getting a little curious about maybe having a learning disability is not something wrong with me. Maybe it's something different. And that is just going to evolve as her parents continue to have these conversations with her over time.
I love that. And sometimes it takes a while, right? It's like they're absorbing the information. It's kind of sinking in there and they're making the connections. And then later on, that conversation with grandpa, it's like, it's top of mind. And now I'm sharing it because it resonated with me in some way.
Yeah, I think it's a really important piece for parents to understand, because so many parents are like, this is my moment and I'm going to mess it up, or something's going to go wrong, or I'm not sure, or they didn't understand. And so the more experiences I have with this exact thing, the more confident I get in letting parents know your child's hearing you. They're absorbing, they're processing, and we're going to hear it in a couple months. We might hear it in a year, because I get the emails all the time after my feedback session with a child, even when I think like, oh, I think I missed it. And then 3 months later, I get an email from a parent saying, my child brought it up today, and how maybe, there's some cool things about, being autistic that they didn't think about before. Or, we were on a walk and my child said, I really like the ideas part of writing, even though the writing part of writing is still hard. And they come out randomly and they just drive home the point that kids are processing. And when it's part of our vernacular, when we have a way of talking about highways and construction zones and how those are evolving on a regular basis, it's going to sink in. And it really does help to shift that narrative.
And that really, again, speaks to the idea that this is not a one and done conversation. These are ongoing conversations as the child's brain is continuing to develop, as they're having more experiences, as they're bringing in that information and connecting it to the way their brain is organized. And that should be, helpful to parents to know as well, is that they can be part of this ongoing discussion. It's not just the one meeting with the practitioner who did the assessment. It's those conversations that they continue to have at the dinner table, in the car on the way to school, on a walk. It's ongoing and it's important.
Exactly.
So before you leave, it seems like this time has just flown by. Do you have any guidance for parents who are hesitant to share their child's profile with them, their diagnosis with them, or even share the results with the school? I have that a lot too. It's where, parents don't want the school to have the information, even though they've spent this time finding out for themselves. Yeah.
Well, I think that if you're just thinking about starting to have these conversations, I think one place to start is actually on my website, where there are a ton of resources. And so if you go to explainingbrains.com/parents, you will see resources for empowering your ADHD child, empowering your dyslexic child, empowering your autistic child. And in each of those sections, there is an article that walks you through how to talk to kids about their diagnosis and some of the common highways and construction zones for each of these profiles. So every child is going to be a little different, but this language is designed to really help parents kind of think about what are some of the things that I might say or might offer to my child when I'm talking about it, or even just shifting your lens to think about these developmental diagnoses in a different way. And there's also on the parent page, there's a script, like a fill in the blank script that you can use to plan out how you might talk to your child. And then you have all the information you need to kind of read through it. So just getting some of those resources. There are videos and ways to show kids you're not alone. Here's an introduction to your community. So there are a ton of resources at explainingbrains.com/parents that will really help get you oriented. Some good times to talk to your child, like when you start this, if your child is being assessed, that is absolutely the time to talk to them. In fact, you should always having a way of saying that here is something that we learned. Even if you're not ready to share the diagnosis yet, just sharing, we learned something about your highways and construction zones, and we're going to keep getting curious about those things over time. Because the child is the one who's doing all the work in the assessment. So we owe it to them to talk to them about what in the world happened.
Absolutely.
Other kind of points of time that are good to have these conversations might be if your child's starting a new intervention, like they're going to start a speech class or they're going to start tutoring, is kind of a time to say, hey, I know that you're starting with, Mr. Smith next week, but I just wanted to have a chance to tell you what we're doing there and why we're doing that. It's because of the stuff that we learned. And again, in that script, it kind of walks you through how you might do that. Or it might be because you just listened to this podcast.
Yes.
And like, hey kid, child of mine, I just heard this and it got me thinking that there are some things that we know about how your brain works best that we haven't shared with you yet. And I really want to have an opportunity to do that. And so doing it on a walk, doing it over ice cream, any environment that is going to tell your child you are definitely not in trouble and this is not a bad thing. So whatever that is, shooting baskets. A lot of times having these conversations when you're not making direct eye contact can be really helpful. Any parent of a teenager knows that all the best conversations happen in the car. Driving somewhere. So those are just some different tips for doing it. And if your child is seeing a therapist or working with somebody at school, recruiting that person to help you with this conversation can be really helpful as well to kind of get some of the nuances to what to say. But the goal of the website is really to have all of that language there to really inspire parents to feel confident having these conversations with kids, getting it started so that we can start to shift those narratives.
Wonderful. Wonderful. And for the practitioners who are listening, you also have great resources for practitioners. And I'm going to put a separate link for them on the website as well. So make sure if you're a practitioner listening that you check out the show notes to help your clients and your patients with this understanding of their profile. Dr. Angoff, thank you for all that you do to help families understand their child's profile, again, from a neurodiversity affirming perspective, and for sharing so many great strategies, resources, and tools for talking to children about their unique brains. Thank you so much. And I'll be sure to put, again, links to all of those great resources in the show notes.
Thank you, Karen. This has been really fun.
I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Dr. Liz. For more information about her and her work, please be sure to check out explainingbrains.com/parents. And that link is available in the show notes. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening to Diverse Thinking, Different Learning by Child Nexus. For more resources, visit us online at childnexus.com.